In this video help tutorial, we're on the work order edit screen where you do your input for the work order. Now I want to make sure you understand that this is a work order edit screen, and there'll be more information here that is actually creating a invoice or work order that is not going to be shown on the actual invoice or work order. So let's go ahead and take a look at the basic things on this screen. First of all, we have our application navigator and our do action menus. We have a series of popovers down this side. We have two types of invoices, a work order invoice that has 8 rows and a work order long that has as many rows as you put into the work order. For example, the scrolls, you can add as many rows as you want in here. Each time you click in a blank record in a row and start creating it, it'll add another blank like this one below the work order row. So what you're doing is you're setting up a new record to start with. When you come in here, you go over, click add record. It'll be all blank, and what you're going to be doing is it'll automatically put in the work order number. You'll be adding the date, the work time that you're actually starting the work, the client. In this case, I just use an example record in the client record, and the same thing for the business. So if you clicked on here and wanted to put in either the client or the business, you could pick it from this list here to add it to this row. So this is where you're creating the invoice and adding either an individual client or a business or the information for both. The next thing I want to show you is the purchase order number. If this is a business or you're working for a company that gives you purchase orders to go do work, then this would be where the purchase order number goes. Just click in and add your purchase order number. The next thing I want to show you is this field here, which is called the work order right now, can be anything you need it to be. For example, it can be a quote, an invoice. In this case, we are a work order. A quote hold where you actually have an invoice or a work order that is on hold now until it's actually approved. You could actually send out a collection notice for somebody who has not paid all their bill and title it collection. And then you could have duplicate invoice if you're sending it out to somebody for a duplicate and a duplicate quote, either one, to send out to a client. In some cases, you may have to send duplicates to the accounting office so that you can tell that it is a duplicate, not the original. You would want to mark it as such. Once again, these have the dollar signs in them where you can actually click on it, bring up and set whatever money symbol you want for one of the 53 countries out there in the world. This row that we're looking at here is the subtotal for the information that's here, which is labor and materials. Top row being labor by hours, the rate for the information and for the rate. And that actually is based on whatever your rate would be for that particular kind of a task. I've learned with the service business, there may be one different rate for a different type of job that you're doing. And in this particular case, if you had multiple people and they're both working on it, it'd be the combined work hours of both people. And then if you had to do an extra rate that is different than the two, create another row and do the hours separately. And you can indicate that in the information. Okay, then the labor would be calculated based on the hours times the rate. And then down here it has a thing called the task status. Now, if you're going to change the task status, you can click on this button and add a new record in this screen where you can add additional information. Now, you don't edit in this field. You add new, you edit up here. And if you want to change it after it's already in there and you move between them, you can go ahead and just click on this and you can edit up on this screen. Let's go back to the work order, service work order. Now, this is a bit of a complex way to do things, but it works really well if you understand what I'm doing here. Some businesses have a standard tax that they're doing in their area. Okay, so this may be your city or county or combined where the county and city are put together and they're a total in this area for the flat tax. But in some states and regions, they have additional ways of doing tax. First of all, if it's your own company and you're not doing tax at all, you might say no, because that row is not going to have anything for tax. If you are going to tax it, you put this in here. And if you have a different rate for different types of taxes for different items that you're doing, where you're actually going to tax it, but you're going to tax it at a different rate, what you would do is go ahead and put other in there. And I have two examples of this. I have one guy in here that's doing labor and materials where they're added together, and the line subtotal is $89.99. In this case, what I have is I have tax, which takes the 6% and then calculates the tax based on that. And the difference is this one's $41.40 for a flat tax, and the two of them together for both taxes for $7.85 equals $49.25. Now, these are separate in that this is a different, I put a test record in there, but basically it's a different material part at a different rate. And I want to point that out when I'm in here. How do you know what the rate is for a part? Well, if you click on this and you do it correctly in your inventory system, you're going to have the rate right here in it when you look at the part number. So you could look it back up if you needed to. But I'm also going to give you another alternative up here when we talk about inventory up on the top. You may question it or have to change something as far as when you're in the field, as far as changing the rate, and you can do that. But this is the standard rate for this particular part. Okay, let's go out of here. So you see it's 120. In this case it was, pardon me, it's 120.99. It was 300 for the part up here you saw on that last screen. Well, let's say, for example, this item is not going to be taxed at the same rate at 6%. So what you do is you change this down here to whatever it's going to be. And in this case, it was 0.05 for 5%. And they're charging now 5% on an other rate, which is actually $7.85 instead of the full tax rate of 6%. If that's clear, then you got it. And it's pretty straightforward when you think about it. The next thing is coming over to the portal record. If I needed to edit, or I had a record in here and it was incorrect, or say it was on a quote and the quote goes to where they're not going to use that item and they don't want it in their quote, what you do is you go over to the portal, you come up here and you hit the delete row, and this will basically take that one row record out. And as you're looking down here, you can see the information that is actually the inventory lookup. You can scroll through here. You can't edit it, but you can scroll through to verify that what you're doing is the same thing, same part, same nomenclature, and it's the same client up here as far as the information that you're reading and that you want to change. This also takes you to what's called the task status again, where you can change the task status in here if you needed to. And of course, you can always change this like we showed you before in the portal record as far as the actual type of thing that is, either work order. But the key thing I wanted to show you is that you can delete a record in here if you need to. So let's go back to the work order. Now this time in the work order, we've covered everything in these rows. We've covered this line and up here. And we've also covered the invoices, but I didn't go to the actual print invoice. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. In the print invoice, in the do action, you're able to print this from this screen. But you do have the option also to export data out of this from the tables that are in here, or do a find. And in this particular case, what you need to do when you're actually looking at the invoice that you want to print is to either it'll come over here and you'll have the correct one, and you note that when you're coming over to the invoice that it should be the same work order that you're working on. Now, if somebody's doing a find and they've changed the record where it's not available, except for in the screen you were looking at, it's very simple to go over, click do action, say start find, flip it over, go ahead and put in the 1 for that record, for that invoice number that I want, and then go back up and do perform the find. And then that record will be the only one with data. And you'll notice how it popped up that little thing showing there was one record in selection. You should only have one record in selection when you're printing an invoice. Even if it's a long invoice where you have records that exceed the area in the screen, like on the, let's go over there and show you that. If I go to the long invoice, you'll see that this shows one record in here. And what we've done is we have actually two records in here. There are actually two row records in here, and it shows you all the information in the long form. But you'll notice there's no bottom in this. What that means is that where you scrolled and added additional records in the rows, and then there's 10 or 12 or 15 or whatever. Now you're printing whatever the record work order is for all the row in that record for that particular thing. And you'll notice up here you don't have a logo in here. You tap in here, and if you want to add a logo, you tap it in, and then you can pick from the photos library where you can bring over a record image or whatever from your desktop or whatever and put it into your photo library and then draw it right into here. Okay, so let's go back to the work order again. Now, to complete the rest of this work order form and get the full tutorial done, let's take a look and see what we have here. We have service information. Service information is if you're a tech and you're leaving to go do something that you haven't done before, it's a good idea to have a reference for the actual manual and service notes that you can put in here. And then you can also, if you go to their website, which is, say this is a website that you go to get information, you can paste the information, if it's digital, right into the screen as far as the tech information about the service thing you're going to do. So in this case, we're doing a Whirlpool dryer drive motor replacement, and this is a service record for that particular procedure. So what you can do is you can put the technical information in this field right here for all the data that refers to this particular piece of work that you're going to be doing. So for example, if I came back over here, in this case I didn't match up things, but you can get the idea. If this said service task is to fix a dryer, Whirlpool dryer or whatever, that would be the row where I'd be looking up the technical information. Now be aware that when you're in the row for the record for this client, the record information for the service is based on the work order number. So whatever you do, that for that work order is the one that's going to be for that work order. The same thing goes for the service image. These are related records, so what happens is they're always looking back at the work order to say whatever is in here is the work order for this. So for example, if I said this is a drop-down select list and I wanted to put in the dryer we're working on, I could put it in, and then I would go ahead and put in the image file name that I'm going to be using for the name that's talking about. So it may be the pump. So if I jumped over here and said, okay, go ahead and look in my file folder, I can go over here and I can grab this, for example, and now it's in here from the photo library. Then I can put a comment in here basically that says what the procedure is that I'm doing and the notes from this thing as far as the service image for this particular item. So that would be what you'd want to do. To get done, you can click done. Up here I would note what this is. I could say it was a picture of the pump. I could say that was the pump. I may want to have another image down here, so I can create another one and just put any information in here to create your next one. If you go to the actual portal for the image, you're going to see where the information that you were adding over in that other area comes over here. And if you want to go to the source for the website that you were talking at, as far as for the service information, you can click this. If you have a URL in here, it will go to that website and open it in this screen. So you can actually see the website. That's another way to go through and look for additional information based on the actual technical data for that particular screen. And at the same time, if you're in here and you're looking at the website, copy information, pop back over, and paste it back into here as far as service notes and stuff. So this is very relative to what you're doing as far as adding information. If you ever wanted to use it for a different record, you can go ahead and go over here and pop in, copy the information and put it in that other PO's work request where you're putting in that information for that. You can delete a record in here if it's for some reason that you want to get rid of it, if you had to. Back to the work order. Now I want you to note it says at the top, items looked up here do not add records here. You cannot add a record here. In fact, if you click on it, you can't edit it. But you can go over and view it in the actual inventory area for a lookup, or you can scroll through to look at any of the products that are in the database as far as inventory is concerned. And this would give you the items, individual information, the vendor part number, and the vendor that's actually selling the item, and your part number and your nomenclature you're using for your records. So you can always click over here and go in and see that actual information in the inventory system. So you get a quick jump over there if you want to. Next is the mileage track. This is kind of something that's not everybody uses, but it's very important, and I can show you why. The date you actually travel to do this work, the mileage you started at, when you returned or went to the next job, you could go ahead and put in the information for the mileage as you're leaving. Take your mileage reading and put it in here. It will calculate the distance you traveled automatically and put in the miles traveled. You would put in whatever your rate is for the rate that you're doing, 0.75, it's 75 cents per mile. And the actual calculation would be $37.50. That's one trip for 50 miles, $37.50 for tax at the end of the year. And then it'll summarize for this client, for his mileage, for this task, all down here at the bottom. This same information will be available for your taxes at the end of the year, so you can go ahead and do your taxes and calculate all your discounts for mileage for tax return. You can also go to the main record and search for those particular jobs for dates or clients, and then see the summarization for that information there. The next thing we're doing is the last thing we're looking at on this screen for the work order, and that's the PO payment. This is the information we're looking at for the purchase order payment at this location, and we can have the backup for each row that created this. For example, in this case, the field that's green here is the subtotal for this record, and the subtotal for this record for the total amount of $846.98. If there was tax involved, the tax at 6% and or the other tax would be calculated and shown here. Then you would see the grand total for the taxes, which is $41.40 plus $785, that would be added to the number here. Now, if I go ahead and say, okay, I want to take the payment for this today, I would pop over here and you can see it's for work order number 1. I'd put in the date that I want to use for the date. In this case, I'm going to click off and go back because this I want to show you in this purchase order. This was the date that you actually collected the money for it, and if it were the same day, it would be the same day here. In this case, the actual amount, which is the $896.23, is added here. We're going to say that the client only gave us $800, and he gave it to us in a check, and he still owes $96.23. It might be possible that the job was not completed and there has to be more work done, so you collect what you can collect and then come back on the same work order and finish it. Or you can create a new work order and finish it and close this out if you want to. At that point, when you finish that, you would pay the portion here and date it here and show that the work that was performed here, the summary for this particular work order or quote or whatever you're doing would be in this, and then how it's paid. Now, how it's paid is also a list that you can go ahead and check. In this case, I think I got them pretty well. There's not that many. There's credit card, cash check, return, and away. Return is one of the items was returned. You can actually do a negative amount if you had to over here on the record itself, and some people miss that. Say, for example, this item had 2 items in it, and that you only did it by using 1, and you want to do a return. You can either edit it here before you actually do the original billing and make sure that it has the correct amount in it. But say, for example, you went to do the job and had 2 items and you put 1 in and it was bogus for whatever reason, you had to come back and pull one of them out. You could do that, but you could do a next record and do a -1 for the actual amount, and then it would take it out of the invoice and deduct it. So I'm just pointing out that there are ways to deduct things if they're already in the record, and that way you don't have an issue with it as far as the record is concerned. Now let's talk a little bit about quotes. If you're doing a quote and you title this a quote, you want to make sure that you close out the quote. And the way you close it out is to turn it in either into a actual invoice or quote or work order. You do it one way or the other. If it's a quote hold and you're not going to conclude the quote for a while, so you emailed it to somebody and they looked at it and it's on quote hold, you put in quote hold, and if they came back and said, well, I like this and that, but I don't think that I need to fix this right now. Well, you can go ahead and go back in and delete it out of that line by doing what I showed you before. Go to the portal and delete that row. Once it's out of the quote and it's no longer a quote, make it a work order. That way you have that information in there correctly. And that's the way you would convert a quote into a work order. And you don't have to change or do a whole new work order in order to be able to change it, or a new quote. So you're in good shape. Saves you a lot of time, saves paper, saves a lot of headaches. But the one thing you want to make sure you do is if for example, you do a quote, that you go back on some period of time in your work orders on your sales report and make sure that if you have quotes still in there, you either close them out, and the way you would close them out is you would make it you would take out the hours amount and the quantity here and leave the work order with the rest of the information in it. This would zero out the subtotal and any information that's over here, and you want it all as 0 because it's calculating the tax based on this number, and it's calculating the actual 2 items by the hours and quantity here. If you take those out for each record in the quote, then this will stay there until maybe the guy comes back and he says, okay, I made a decision, I'm going to go ahead and do something again. Then all you have to do is put the hours and the part number back in, and now you can change it back into, from a quote back into an actual work order. If that's confusing, I'm sorry, but that's what it actually is. There is another last thing we didn't cover in here. Whatever the calculated mileage was, it'll show up on the screen here and you can see what it is. And as before, you can always click on this if you have to change it to another money symbol for another location in the world. Okay, this concludes this tutorial for the work order. But if you have questions, you can always pop over to the Do Action button, click on Support, go to our website, and create a chat and start chatting with us about what your questions and answers are that you need. Thank you for taking this tutorial.